Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Eric Scherter, U.S. Crop Protection Launch Leader with Corteva Agriscience. It's my pleasure to be with you here today as we talk about Enlist herbicides versus in-crop dicamba herbicides, and specifically talking about the differences in off-target movement or spray scenarios. Now before we begin, let's talk about types of off-target movement. And there's two key types that we worry about here in agriculture. The first is physical drift, which is something we're concerned with all pesticides. And simply put, that is the physical movement of those driftable fines away from the intended target to an off-site area, whether that's a field or other environmental setting. Now the case of volatility, that's a little bit different in the fact that we're seeing loss of vapor. So in other words, we made a successful application to that field, but sometime after that vapor either lifted off the foliage or the soil and moved away from the intended target to a non-target area. Two very different aspects when it comes to off-target movement. Now let's look at some of what we've done with Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. First, addressing physical drift. When you buy Enlist 1 herbicide or Enlist Duo, you're naturally getting the Colex-D technology, which is bringing roughly 50% of the drift package we see out of our herbicides. The other thing we're doing is using qualified nozzles that also reduce drift. So when you put the two together, that's giving us the drift reduction that we see. And that can be seen here in this picture. On the picture on the right, you're seeing Enlist Duo herbicide, which again is a premix of 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate with Colex-D technology and an approved nozzle. And you compare that to a more traditional mix of glyphosate and 2,4-D with a flat fan nozzle. Now what you're seeing there is about a 90% reduction in physical drift. So we're still maintaining excellent coverage for our target weeds, but we're reducing the physical drift and why we have those neighbor-friendly applications. Now the other component to physical drift or to off-target movement is the volatility. When you compare Enlist Duo to the Batma salt of dicamba in an apples-to-apples comparison, which Enlist Duo again is a premix of 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate, and you compare that to the Batma salt of dicamba plus glyphosate, again, apples to apples, you see a 98% reduction in volatility with Enlist Duo. Now, on an acid-to-acid basis, for 2,4-D is 236 times less volatile than dicamba. That's a huge difference, and what that really gives us is greater compatibility with surrounding crops. That's why when you look at this list here, none of these crops are considered susceptible on our Enlist labels. And that's a huge difference when you compare that to the in-crop dicambas. So take, for example, soybeans. If I'm planting Enlist soybeans and the day I'm making an application, the wind is blowing towards my neighbor's field that is non-Enlist, as long as all other parameters on the label are met, I can make a successful application that day. Again, neighbor-friendly. In the case of in-crop dicamba herbicides, that's not the case at all. There would be a do not spray. When you start to look at our herbicide tolerant trait systems, one of the new terminologies we're using now is sensitive areas and buffer requirements. And that's what you'll see on all of our labels. Now, the reason for these is so that we are protecting potential endangered species that could be present in these sensitive areas. And you can see the examples in the lower left. Now, when you're looking at the Enlist 1 and or Enlist Duo label, you will see that that buffer requirement is 30 feet downwind from a sensitive area. Now, as you compare that to the in-crop dicamba herbicides, that can range anywhere from 210 to 310 feet. That's a huge difference when you start thinking about what you cannot apply with the in-crop dicamba, but you are able to utilize Enlist 1 and Duo in more portions of your field. Now let's look up some scenarios here and compare and contrast a little bit so you understand some of the differences. Over on the left-hand side, we have our Enlist E3 soybeans. On the right, we have Roundup Ready Xtend soybeans. We have a wind coming from the north, blowing south at 5 miles an hour. Can you spray? Well, in the case of the Enlist soybeans, absolutely, because soybeans are not considered a susceptible crop. In the case of Roundup Ready Xtend systems or the in-crop dicamba herbicides, you could not spray that day because Liberty or any soybean is considered a susceptible crop. A big difference. What about if it's blowing in other directions? So let's look at Enlist soybeans, and we've got from a west to east, 3 to 10 mile an hour blowing towards corn. Well, in that case, once again, we can make a successful application. We do not need any wind directional buffers or any setbacks because corn is not considered a sensitive crop. Let's take another scenario here where the wind's blowing from the east to the west. Now it's blowing towards the road, but on the other side of the road west of there is a vineyard. In that particular instance, that is a do not spray. And as you visit our label, you will see many of the other susceptible crops like cucurbits, watermelons, and tomatoes. All those crops that we know are sensitive to 2,4-D. We would want to wait until the wind has shifted and is blowing away from those particular sensitive crops. And lastly, for our cotton folks, when you're down south and we've got cotton and the wind's blowing from the west to the east and we have any other non-enlist cotton, that would also too be a do not spray because we know cotton is considered a sensitive crop. Now folks, when you start to compare and contrast the two when it comes to off-target movement and some of the spray scenarios, I think you can easily see there's a huge advantage to the Enlist weed control system. Please visit us at www.enlist.com for more resources on this Enlist One or Enlist Duo. Until we meet again, have a safe spring and good luck.